So today I'm talking about evolution and function. I put these two together because, as we'll see, you can't have one without the other. But before thinking about evolution, it's useful to review some of the reasons to resist the idea that the mind might have evolved. So first of all, the argument for design. The intricacy and interrelatedness of watch parts serves a function. So this is the argument from Paley that if you look at a watch, it is intricate and the interrelatedness is functional in this way. And if any of the pieces were missing, that watch would not function. If the watch could not have come together by accident or by natural causation, that's the critical premise that, if you're walking along the beach and you see this watch, it couldn't have gotten there by accident. It had to have been designed and then dropped there by someone. So the watch must have been designed to serve this function that it serves, because these parts relate to each other in this critical sort of way. So this is the argument that a watch must have been designed, and then that's used then as an analogy to function for humans. So the analogy here then is the intricacy and interrelatedness of things in nature, such as an eye, which is used as an example of this intricate, wonderful, watch-like sort of design. That interrelatedness serves a function. If any of those pieces were missing, then the eye would not function. If you didn't have a retina, you wouldn't have a functional eye. If you didn't have the cornea, you wouldn't have a functional eye. It had to go through the optic chiasm and get reversed. All of those kinds of clever things that an eye does, it needs all of those parts to be able to function. And so they couldn't have come together by accident because of this intricate interrelatedness. And therefore we have the same conclusion that the eye must have been designed to serve this function that it serves. And so this idea then is just like a watch, the eye must have been designed. Design, this intricate interrelatedness of parts, implies that there's a designer. The eye is like a watch. So that's the argument for design, analogy from the watch to the eye in terms of your interrelatedness. But there's an alternative. You can think of the evolution as an alternative argument. The evolutionary algorithm is variety plus selection plus heredity gets you evolution. So here the argument is that random mutations in gene sequences result in variations. That's the first part of the algorithm. Advantageous traits are likely to be reproduced, and so here you've got reproduction and heredity. So anything that's a trait is going to be passed on by heredity and therefore reproduced. And gradual change over time then explains biological function. So if we've got this variation and selection and passing that on over time, then we can see how change evolves. And so here in this case, design does not imply a designer. And if we look carefully at the eye, it's actually an example of really poor design. The image on the retina has this big blind spot. We talked about the blind spot on the retina and the way that it gets filled in or omitted, or however you want to interpret that. But there is this empty space that appears in your visual processing. The processing of the retinal image takes up a huge portion of your occipital cortex in order to convert the image to a useful form. So you've got all of this kind of, it's projected backwards, it has to be turned around, the processing happens in all these different areas as another thing that we've talked about in terms of how things get processed. So it really doesn't seem like the eye is a good example of design. If you were going to design something, you wouldn't have designed this. So it looks like the eye actually is a good example of design without a designer. And this is one of my favorite consciousness cartoons because it illustrates so well the kind of human thinking and the kind of human resistance to the idea that all of who we are is the product of evolution. So what are the principles? Eat, survive, reproduce. Eat, survive, reproduce, all the way along. And then here we are. What's it all about? Because we have this capacity for self-reflection, it seems like who we are isn't connected, or we have a hard time connecting who we are to this kind of story of random replications through natural selection over the course of time. So one of the things that we need to do in thinking about this, if this kind of story is going to be plausible, is we need to think more about our connections with these animals and what we have in common with those animals and what ways are we distinct from those animals, and try to get a clearer sense about where this sort of sense of disconnect comes from. And we'll do more of that kind of discussion when we talk about animal minds. So as our way of wrapping up then our thinking about the role of evolution in consciousness, it's important to think that to realize that there are several different ways you can go that conform with some of the ways that we've already been thinking about consciousness. And so the first way is the epiphenomenalist way, the way of thinking that consciousness is inessential, that zombies could be possible. Consciousness is unique and not explicable in terms of function, so we could have evolved to do exactly the same things without consciousness. So on this sort of story, the epiphenomenalist story, consciousness has no adaptive value. It wasn't selected for anything. Zombies could have evolved just exactly to do exactly the same sorts of things that we do, and consciousness is special and extra. It's like a spandrel. One way of thinking about it is like this extra stuff that emerged even through the process of evolution. We can say that that it was caused by physical biological processes, but it's extra. It doesn't serve any adaptive value on the kind of consciousness inessentialist story. So that's the first possible position that you can take. Zombies are not possible because consciousness has a particular function and it evolved to serve that function. So if you're a functionalist, you think consciousness serves a function, it evolved, it got selected for somehow, for some reason in this evolutionary process. We could not do exactly the same functions without consciousness. Okay, so that's the second position. The functionalist position, consciousness serves a function. Then the third position is the eliminativist view, with this basic argument that zombies are not possible because consciousness is not separate. So you say it's not separate, it's just the same as these other traits. The same thing as saying there's an illusion that we have that it's not separate. We have an illusion that consciousness is special, but in fact it's just these other traits that consciousness has been, have been adapted to, these other traits that have had an adaptive function that they perform. When all these other traits are explained, then consciousness will be explained. So thinking in the eliminativist way is to think about consciousness as not something extra. It doesn't serve its own function. It's simply a matter of serving the functions that these other traits like memory and attention and perception serve. So last thought, be thinking about which of these three positions you like. This is one of the things that we'll talk about during class discussion is, which is most reasonable? Did consciousness evolve to serve a function? Is it an epiphenomenalist extra? Or is it simply a matter of these other adaptive traits?